Hello everybody, it's Kara from Wild Book Garden, and today I am here with yet another catch-up wrap-up. I am actually having to refilm this one because some of the videos I had already filmed, I had to scrap and redo, and I'm very upset about that. But I have tried to reconstruct my notes and my thoughts, so let's get into this next chunk of books. Content warnings will be in the description box as always, and I will also link people and videos that I mention. So the first book I'm going to talk about is The Fall of the House of Tatterly by Shauna Miles. This is a spooky middle grade book. We are following our main character Theo, and it is set in modern day Charleston. So Theo Tatterly's family, they have these like different gifts associated with like the spirit world, like with being able to like interact with ghosts, and that is sort of their like profession. Like that is something that their family has always kind of done, or at least for a long time that's something their family has done, and that they like help people with these kinds of problems. They sometimes like help spirits like pass on or find peace. They have sort of different variations on these abilities. Like Theo specifically, his ability is the ability to see ghosts, and he does use this gift, but he tries not to use it too much because, you know, sometimes he can't necessarily help ghosts, or sometimes it would even be dangerous for him to try because not all ghosts mean well. And so he has to be really careful not to let the ghosts like recognize that he can see them. But Theo ends up becoming very involved in some like things happening with the spirit world because it turns out that there is a very dangerous, very angry spirit that is loose and is causing some havoc in the physical world and also in the like ghost or spirit world, and that specifically this spirit has it out for Theo and his family and is basically trying to get rid of their whole family. And I did really like this. I liked Theo a lot as a main character. I loved the emphasis on family in this book and how important that was to the story and to like Theo and his life and to like solving the problem, like addressing the conflict in this book, and how much he like how much like his family was part of that solution. I thought that was really cool. There were also some really great, really well done creepy moments. I did really like the setting, and I just like had a good time with this one. I do feel like I wanted a little bit more from the sort of like resolution of the conflict, or of like the like specifically the targeting Theo's family part. I just kind of wanted more from that. And I also feel like some of the connecting writing or like connecting scenes sometimes didn't flow smoothly enough. But in general, I liked this a lot, and I gave The Fall of the House of Tatterly 4 stars. Next, I finished Sons of Blackbird Mountain by Joanne Bischoff. This is one of 2 sort of companion books, but you can definitely read it as a standalone. I would recommend doing that. And this was a buddy read with my friend Julia from Shakespeare and Such. She had actually read this previously, and like we had talked about it a lot, and we had planned to read this and the companion book together at some point, and so we finally did that. I listened to the audiobook, which was narrated by Amy Rubinate, and I thought she did a really excellent job. So we are following our main character Avon, who originally is Irish, but at this point has been living in Norway for several years. She ended up marrying this man as a way to essentially get out of the workhouse, and they had a good relationship. Like they were maybe even heading towards a more affectionate relationship when he died suddenly. And so this is obviously really hard for her, and she writes a letter to her husband's family who live in, where is it specifically? Okay, it just says the rugged hills of 19th century Appalachia, so I don't remember what state it was. She actually had been having a correspondence with, I don't know if it was like her husband's great aunt or something, but they had gotten really close through these letters, and the aunt had said to Avon like, well, you know, you need somewhere to go. Why don't you come like live with us and kind of like look after like the boys kind of thing. And like very intentionally, she made it sound like these are like young kids that like Avon needs to help sort of like take care of and babysit. And Avon gets there, and these are like grown men. Like they're young men, but it's like, okay, this is not the situation she thought it was, but this is kind of her only family. And she did get really close with this great aunt, who has unfortunately passed away since the exchange of letters, because obviously sea travel takes a long time. So Avon decides to sort of make the most of it for now and to stay. And she ends up settling in much more than she thought. She ends up becoming really close with these people and with their friends and their like home and this sort of community. And she also ends up having a connection with one of the brothers whose name is Thor, and he is deaf. And this is something that I can't speak to personally, but it seems like from the author's writing and the way she like talked about it in the author's note and things like that, it seems like she did a lot of research and a lot of work to portray what it would be like to live as a deaf person in this time period, and some of the things that people didn't know yet, you know, hadn't figured out yet, but also ways that people were innovating, and the way that Thor has had to make all of these changes and adaptations to just, you know, try and navigate the world, but also how his family and loved ones have helped him do that. Oh, I also meant to mention this at the beginning, but this is also Christian romance, and I don't read a ton of Christian fiction. I am very particular about it, but I was really liking this one. I'll get to the issue in a minute here, but I was liking this. I thought the heavy topics were handled sensitively. Thor also is dealing with alcoholism and not really admitting that he has that problem, but he does decide to do something about it in like through the course of the story. I really loved the sort of family element of this book and like the friendships. Like there is a family of like formerly enslaved Black people that is close with this family, the Norgard family, and I really liked their characters. There were some like questionable choices made, especially in the second book, about I don't know, like the way that they view certain things that I'm like, I don't know if that's how people would feel in this situation. So it certainly wasn't perfect, but I did really like their characters. I liked Avon as a protagonist. I really liked the romance, like the developing romance between her and Thor. Like they had some really like lovely like romantic moments between them that I really liked. But the reason that I ended this book feeling much less positively is specifically a thing that happens at the end that I hate it. Like I really hate the way that this was dealt with. I just found this handled so insensitively and just really thoughtlessly. Like I don't understand why Joanne Bischoff would do this. Like, if this really was something that the author was like, no, this has to be in the book, this is necessary for the story I'm telling, I think there are a lot of things that she should have done differently that would have made it a much less, honestly, disgusting, like, experience. Like, it was so unpleasant, to say the least, to read this and to have it done in a way that I personally feel was very insensitive. Again, like avoiding spoilers here, but like I think that the ordering of events in this book should have been a lot different. Like maybe this would have happened much closer to the beginning of the book, so that we can actually deal with the fallout and the consequences of this. I think that the point of view choices, some of the point of view choices, because we do, like, it's not just Avon and Thor that we get chapters from. Like, I think that should have been really different if this was the direction she was going to go. I think that the writing choices around the actual like ending of the book and around the characterization and like the words used, all of that, I think that should have been a lot different, a lot more like mindful. Yeah, like I guess there's limited ways to describe it when I'm trying not to spoil things. And like the character who's involved in this, it's not like they're my favorite. I actually didn't care for them for a lot of the book. But I just think that the way that this was written, it did not connect to the setup of this character, and not in a way that felt intentional to me. Like, I don't feel like the author was, like, saying something by making this come out of seemingly nowhere, or at least with very little setup. And it really, like, soured a lot of my experience with this book. Like, I don't remember what I settled on as a rating. Like, somewhere around, I think I gave it, like, 3.5 or 3.75, but that doesn't feel right to me anymore. It might be more of like a 3 stars at most. Like, I was enjoying this book, I was appreciating it, and then even though I knew this was coming because of some things that Julia we had discussed previously, it still made me so angry the way that it happened and the way that it was written. So anyway, I feel like I'm just talking in circles at this point, which is extra not helpful because I'm not giving specifics, but I hated the ending so much, and I don't know how to average out that experience. Somewhere around 3 stars. I don't know. Next, I finished Sleeping Spells and Dragon Scales by Wendy S. Swore. I received this as an ARC, and I do have a spoiler-free review, which I will link below. But I absolutely loved this. This is a contemporary book that talks and deals a lot with fantasy, but it is definitely a contemporary. We are following two kids, Liam and Elena, who were like best friends when they were little, like a few years ago, because they're still pretty young. But then something happened. They sort of like drifted apart, and Elena is like super into like fantasy and like fairy stories and things like that. And she also has type 1 diabetes. And so that is something that she has to consider in her life. I think that was really well done, the way that it was shown in the book, that like this is not like her whole personality. Like she is a person outside of that, but also it does influence the things that she thinks about and like the choices that she and her family makes and things like that. And then Liam, our other main character, he starts having these like really strange like experiences. He's always been like a super athletic kid, like he plays soccer, and he starts having these really scary experiences where he gets really dizzy, he like passes out, he can't stay awake, and like nobody, like the adults that he's talking to, nobody believes him except his parents, thankfully. So he does have some people to depend on. But like the doctors or like teachers at school, they think that he's lazy, that he's like staying up too late, that he's not doing enough. And meanwhile, Liam is really scared because he doesn't know why his body is doing this. And Elena is thinking like maybe that this adventure they had when they were younger, like a few years ago, that maybe he was cursed by a fairy. So there is sort of this like magical, like is it magical element? But one thing I really appreciate is that at no point did the fantastical element like interfere with like the discussion about like these very real like disabilities and conditions. I think that is really important, and I think this book did a really good job with that. And yeah, I just loved it. I loved Liam and Elena. This book especially deals with like sort of different disabilities being perceived differently, or different illnesses being perceived differently. Like, you know, when somebody doesn't look sick or doesn't look disabled versus like what people expect disabilities to look like. But then also how like Elena and her family, like her experience with her diabetes is like people also sometimes get very uncomfortable that she is visibly disabled, like that she is, you know, checking her glucose, or like that she has to just consider all these other things that other people don't. I really loved the friendship between these two kids. I love how like warm and funny their friendship is. Like the dialogue in the book is great. And my heart just really hurt for Liam, because like to have this terrifying thing happen to you that you don't understand, and then to have people not only not believe you, but blame you for it, is just heartbreaking. And unfortunately, it happens to a lot of people, and it's probably especially kids, because, you know, of course, adults know best. And so I think that portrayal was done very sensitively. And yeah, I thought this was wonderful. More thoughts in that review, but 5 stars for Sleeping Spells and Dragon Scales. Next, I finished Cats of the Louvre by Taiyo Matsumoto, translated by Michael Arias. This is a manga, and this is part of a larger project that I think it was a lot of different, I don't know if they were all art museums or if some of them were other kinds of museums, but like different manga or graphic novels or books set at different famous museums. And so this one, of course, takes place at the Louvre. And this was such an interesting experience. So we are following a cast of characters where some of them are human and some of them are cats. Like there are these like stray cats that like kind of hang out in Paris, like around the Louvre. And in the story, at least, I don't know how much of that is true, but in the story, at least, there are like stray cats that actually like take shelter in like old unused like attics sort of in the Louvre, or like right next to it. And the sort of overall story is kind of a mystery sort of about like this one specific painting and a disappearance that happened around this painting. One of the characters' sister actually like disappeared, and nobody knows what happened to her, and he has always said that it has something to do with this painting, and other people of course don't believe him, but some of our other main characters who like just meet this man and who make friends with him, some of them maybe do believe him, some of them just want to help him out, and so they sort of start like investigating this, I guess. I thought the like mystery and like disappearances around paintings, I thought that was going to be a like bigger plot element. Like it's not that it wasn't important in the story, because it was, but I wasn't thinking it was going to be such a personal plot. But it was still very engaging and interesting, and I was really liking this. I think that the particular kind of like strange and like absurdist almost like kind of blending of like genre and tone and everything, that is something that doesn't always work for me, because I think a lot of times for me that sort of weirdness can come at the expense of like meaningful story or like characterization or themes or something like that. But this story, I think, did a really good job of still having those things. I thought the characterization of the cats and of the humans was done well and really interesting. I also thought the art style really worked for the feeling of this story. So this was going to be a 4 stars for me, but the reason I ended up giving it 3 is a pretty prominent aspect of the ending that I'm going to talk about in a non-spoiler way. But basically, like, it really felt like the ending was sort of glorifying the idea of some of these cats, like, having to go on adventures and, like, as strays, basically, and, like, leaving the relative safety of, like, their home, like, where they're taking shelter, and that is, like, the only way to sort of, like, be happy or to find fulfillment. And as I have talked about before on this channel, I am a big animal lover. I currently have 3 cats whom I love very much. And actually one of the 3 is a stray, who is now not a stray, obviously. And so, you know, I obviously have like a personal connection to this, but I just think it's very weird because the rest of the story, I think, did a really good job of not sugarcoating how dangerous and sad it is for animals to not be taken care of. And I do know that there are parts of the world where it is safe for animals to just kind of roam, so I'm not saying that that isn't the case, but a lot of places are not like that. Like, it would be, I agree that it would be great if we lived in a world where it was safe for, you know, pets to roam freely, but we don't live in that world yet, and I think it is irresponsible to act like we do. And maybe it sounds like I'm taking this, like, fantastical story too seriously, but I really want to communicate that, like, there were other plot points in the story that were very serious and very honest about how dangerous and sad it is for animals to not be taken care of, like for animals to be just sort of like left to the mercy of the wild or of these urban areas. Like, especially this is in Paris, you know, it's in a metropolitan area, a large city. And so it just really didn't sit right with me. And I don't think, like, as like fantastical as some pieces of the story were, I don't think it was fantastical enough for that ending to feel like fantasy, if that makes sense. So that just really rubbed me the wrong way. I didn't like the way that the ending played out and the sort of like message it seemed to be presenting. And like I said, I also just think on a storytelling level, it didn't make sense with other parts of the manga. So it ended up being a 3 stars. Like, I did still like a lot of things about it, but there was a pretty big chunk of it that didn't work for me because, again, even though it was just a part of the ending, that does really reflect back on a lot of the other like things in the story, or like how something was handled or how it was inconsistent. So yeah, 3 stars for that one. Next, I finished Saving Marilee by Annette K. Larson. This is the 3rd book in the Books of Delphia series, which is a series of companion books, and they are fantasy, but it's fantasy in the sense that it's a different world, but there's not really, I don't know that there's any magic in them, actually. And so each one follows a different sister, except for the last one, I think, is a friend. And there is a romance element in each of these, at least in the ones that I've read so far. But I think at least as important, probably more important in the story, is the main character's like development and sort of journey, which I really like. I appreciate that a lot. And I'm also finding that I have this like special appreciation and like respect for books that are like kind of cozy and warm feeling, but that also deal with some pretty heavy topics, but in a way that doesn't feel jarring with the rest of the story while also taking them seriously. And this one has been, I think, the most serious of the 3 that I've read so far, because Marilee, our main character, has just gotten out of an abusive marriage. Like, at the very beginning of the book, we know that her husband has just died, and Marilee is finally free of this man and of this horrible relationship. So she basically, like, writes to her in-laws and is like, here's all the arrangements you guys need to make, like, I'm done. And so it's about her getting to take her own life back, like getting to find out what kind of person she is, like seeing her just like rediscover like things that she likes and dislikes was so moving and beautiful. Like there were all these things about herself that had gotten buried, or that she didn't even have a chance to discover because of the emotional abuse that her husband was inflicting on her. And so that's sort of the overall story, is it's about Marilee sort of like rediscovering who she is and getting to make her own choices and starting to heal from this horrible relationship that she has been in. And she does have some people to support her, like several of the servants who had worked like in the household she was really close with, and so they kind of help her through. Like she does have friends. We also see her finally like reaching out to her family about like what her life was like, and the way that her like shame is portrayed I think is so nuanced. Like Marilee is embarrassed, you know, that this happened to her. She is still fighting against this instinct that it was her fault, or that she shouldn't need other people to support her, that she should have like fixed this herself. And to see her like unpack that throughout the book was so beautifully done. And there is, like I said, a romantic element in this book. And I think when a book is dealing with the topics that this one is, I think it is so important to handle, like if there is going to be a romantic element, I think it has to be handled very, very carefully. And I feel like this one was. There is a young man who is a neighbor of Marilee, and she is understandably extremely wary of strangers, specifically men, and he understands that. There are moments where he messes up, or where he doesn't fully like listen to what Marilee is saying, but for the most part he is a really good person, and he is like doing his best to understand and to be there for Marilee without like pressuring her or pushing her. And so I actually really liked the relationship between them. So I did like the romance, but like I said, what really I think shines about this book for me is Marilee herself, and just like what a wonderful like character study this is. And as I said at the beginning, like it is a very warm feeling book. Like we see some things in flashbacks, but the fact that we know that, you know, Marilee has gotten out of this situation, I think that helps. And I just feel like there was a lot of like care put into how the author was like introducing these memories like in the story. And I also think that there was that care when it came to writing Marilee's like character arc and her like experience, and like I said, like relearning things about herself or learning things that she never had the opportunity to know about herself. Like she is just so overwhelmed to be able to choose things again. And so it is really emotional and really satisfying to see her start to do that. As I said, to see that she does have people who love her and who support her, but also she is still very much like her own person. Like that's the whole point. And I specifically love the way that the author handled a scene at the end between Marilee and the love interest. I think it is such a great example of how you can have a romantic moment that is also very much focused on the main female character's agency. I just loved that. And I also think this book did just a really good job of showing that abuse, it doesn't have to be physical to be devastating. And even like the little ways that Marilee's trauma was like shown to have affected her throughout the story. Like there were some things that she sort of knew, that she recognized were going to be hard for her, but then there were some things that she didn't expect. Like somebody shuts a door too loudly and she almost has a panic attack because of what that like sort of represents for her. And I think all of that was handled so well. Obviously, I really loved this. This has been by far my favorite in the series so far. Like, I did really enjoy the other two, but yeah, this one was just on another level for me. I gave Saving Marilee 5 stars. I don't think you would need to read the previous 2 books. Like, there are characters who show up again, but I think that this works pretty well as a standalone, and I just thought it was excellent. Next, I finished Where the Lost Ones Go by Akemi Dawn Bowman. This was a gift from my lovely friend Yvette from Book Cave. I don't remember, I think this might have been a birthday gift, but it could also have been Christmas. And so we are following our main character, let me check her name, Elliot. And so she has recently lost her grandmother, who she was really, really close to, her grandmother, who she calls Babong, and her parents have moved, and Elliot really didn't want to. Her parents are kind of trying to make her see this as like a good thing and as like a way to, you know, start to heal. But Elliot feels like they're forgetting Babong. And so she is understandably very upset about that. And then she ends up spending a lot of time at this like old strange house in her new neighborhood, and she makes friends with a girl there, maybe more than friends. And they are sort of exploring this old house and the history of this house. And Elliot actually ends up like realizing or meeting these ghosts that live in the house and that are kind of stuck there. Like they aren't able to pass on for whatever reason. And because they are stuck, they are actually starting to like lose pieces of themselves, like lose their memories, lose who they are. And that is especially heartbreaking for Elliot, and she refuses to let this happen because she actually lost her grandmother to dementia, to like complications from dementia, and she has decided that she is never going to let anybody else like forget things around her again, like lose themselves to forgetting things, which I just think is already such an emotional like connection for a story to make. Like that premise and that like mirroring of like memory and grief is just, it's so well done. Yeah, so I really, really loved this. I really liked Elliot as a main character. I obviously was very moved by her motivation, and I thought that was just dealt with really, really well in the story. I adored her grandmother and her memories of her and the way that she is such a vibrant presence in the story, despite the fact that she doesn't really like appear as a character in the story. As I said, I think the blending of grief and memory and like how those things are so connected, and just like the exploration of like how it feels to lose somebody who is still physically there, but the thing that makes them who they are isn't there. Like it's very emotional. Like even just reviewing it, I'm like getting kind of emotional about it. So I thought that was done really well. I do think that like the actual ghost story aspect of it and the way that that played out and was solved, I think I wanted a little bit more from it. Like I think I wanted more impact from that piece of the story, more similar to what I felt about Elliot and what she was going through. Like I just didn't feel like the like ghost characters and sort of their plot, I don't think it had the same like impact and like detail that the rest of the book did. So I would have liked to see a little bit more of that, but the thing that bumped this up from a 4.5 to a 5 stars is at the end, I cried so much more than I was expecting. And as we know, that often will take a book from a 4.5 to a 5 stars. So thank you, Yvette. I did love this. This was fantastic. I gave Where the Lost Ones Go 5 stars. Next, I finished Highcliffe House by Megan Walker. This is a proper romance, and I actually received this copy as an ARC, so I have a spoiler-free review for it that I will link below. But the TLDR is that I absolutely loved this. This is like, I think easily one of my favorite romances I've read recently, and it is set in Brighton. It is a dual point of view. We are following Anna and Graham as our leads. So Anna is really, really close with her father. She has lost her mother, and her dad is really the person that she's closest to now. And actually right before the book starts, Anna has just been put in a really like embarrassing situation where she basically gets like publicly embarrassed, like dumped almost, by this young man that everybody was kind of thinking that they were engaged or like about to be engaged. And so he made her look ridiculous. And of course the negative social consequences are almost all on her side. And so she just wants to get out of London, avoid the season, just like go with her father to like a nice little seaside cottage and just hide from the world for a while. But it turns out that's not going to happen because Graham, our other main character, he is actually like really good friends with her dad, and they're actually business partners. So what Graham does is he sort of like, he like works in investment, but it's not in the like sketchy like speculation way that a lot of times it can be. And so he and Anna's dad are like, they've worked together a lot in the past. He comes to him with this proposition about Brighton. He's saying that like the town of Brighton is really like up and coming. It's going to be this huge resort town. They should invest in some property there, and that it would really be a success. And it's at this point, like that hasn't really started taking off yet. So Graham's a little ahead of the curve. And so Anna's dad is like, I'm not sure about this, but you know what? If you can convince Anna that this is a good idea, then yes, I will invest. And there are various plot reasons why he does that. But Anna and Graham actually hate each other because for reasons that I was very impressed with, because at first it sounds very superficial, but as the story goes, it really makes a lot of sense why they would rub each other the wrong way for like their entire acquaintance, and also why that would start to change. So yeah, this ends up, of course, being a romance between them, and I loved this so much. I loved our main characters. I think that the development of them and of their relationship was done so convincingly, and I am also really impressed that such a relatively short time frame for the relationship change. I think it really worked, and I think the groundwork was laid so well by the author. Also, as a longtime defender of the enemies to lovers trope, I feel like this is a really good example of that trope done well. I think a lot of times it isn't done well, but this, I think, is really thoughtful. I think it does a great job, like I said, of showing why they didn't like each other. The reasons are believable when you start understanding what they are. And I just found this so romantic and so well done. Like, there are multiple scenes in here. Like, I think I said in my review that there are multiple scenes in here that I'm like, this is so much more like romantic and evocative than like actual sex scenes from romances I've read that are not proper romance. Because I think sometimes there can be an assumption that, you know, a proper romance isn't going to actually be romantic, you know? And I think this book shows that's not true. And yeah, I just loved this. 5 stars for Highcliffe House. I was gonna keep this short and I just started gushing about it. But if you do want more thoughts, I do have that review. And then finally, the last book I'm going to talk about today is Speak Bird, Speak Again, Palestinian Arab Folk Tales by Ibrahim Muhawi and Sharif Kanana, with a new foreword by Ibtisam Barakat. I don't think I actually read the new foreword, but I did read the like other introductory things. So this is a collection of, as it says, Palestinian Arab folktales, and I really enjoy reading like folktales, folklore, that sort of thing, but I don't think I'd read any from this particular region, like from Palestine and like the surrounding area. So for the most part, these stories were all new to me, and I enjoyed this so much. Like, I obviously went into it thinking I would like it, but I loved it even more than I expected. So this is a collection of stories that are sort of organized by theme, and I really liked the way that that was done. I think it did, the like editor and the people who collected these stories, I think they did a really great job of grouping them in a way that made sense, but also the stories that they chose and that they shared, they were still different enough from each other that it was enjoyable to read them. I was also really impressed by the characterization, and the reason I say impressed is because, like I said, I have read quite a few fairy tales and folk tales and I enjoy that, but usually like characterization isn't one of the things that these kinds of stories are concerned with as much. At least in my experience from the ones I've read, it's usually more about, you know, like the setting, the ideas, the themes, or the messages. Sometimes there's a moral for the story, but not always. And for me personally, I don't feel like characters and character development is usually a focus. You know, that's not what they're trying to do. But with a lot of these stories, I just found myself much more invested in these characters than I usually am in folktales. I loved the footnotes that we got. Like, they didn't take over the story or like interfere with my enjoyment of reading the stories, but they provided such important and interesting information about the specific storytellers that these authors like collected these tales from. So I thought that was really cool. About very specific like regional customs. They would explain like, you know, the connotation of a certain word. They would explain like why a certain like pattern of speech was used at the beginning of like multiple stories. I just really liked that. And then I also feel like the editors and the commentary that they were doing on the stories and sort of that like background information, I feel like all of that was done in a way that was very like respectful. Basically, I just thought they did a good job of like not portraying like different regions or like different like communities, different groups of people as being like backwards, while also acknowledging the differences between what would be considered acceptable like in, you know, past times and what is considered acceptable now. So I really loved this. I gave Speak Bird, Speak Again 4.5 stars. I really feel like I learned a lot. I just had, like I said, they were just fun. They were engaging and interesting to read. And also, this is quite a chunky book, and I found this so incredibly readable. Like, I would read like multiple stories in a sitting, and it didn't feel at all like a slog to get through. So I definitely would recommend this, and yeah, I would definitely like to read more folktales from Palestine and the surrounding areas, because like I said, I hadn't really been Like I hadn't really read those before. Okay, everybody, so that was the next group of books I am catching up with. Let me know if you have thoughts on these, if you're interested in any of them. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you soon with another video, and I hope you love the next book you read. Bye!